Speak Podcast. Black Men Speak Podcast. What you need? Black Men Podcast. Long days, heavy on the mind. Still laugh loud, still learn, still grind. We got questions that the world don't teach, so we pull up to the mic, let the heart just reach. Hard topics, but the truth we speak. Oh yeah. Black men speak. Turn it up. Let the truth run deep. Oh yeah. From the barbershop chair to the back row seat. You feel what we feel, then repeat. Then repeat. Black men speak. Talk faith, talk pain, talk pride, talk.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Black Men Speak podcast. I'm your host, Keith Dent, where we highlight ordinary Black men doing extraordinary things. We elevate stories, ideas, conversations that challenge us to think deeper, live fuller, and have a better understanding of the world around us. It's the summer, y'all. I mean, it just came really quickly. But, you know, it's on the East Coast, especially in New York. Things are much sunnier and much brighter because of the New York Knicks. And anyone that lives in New York, you know, if your teams are doing well, the whole city, everybody just feels so much nicer, you know. But today we're going to go back in history a little bit. I'm a big history guy. I love museums, and we're going to go back to kind of a story of courage, contradiction, and humanity in the face of unimaginable evil. You know, when we think about World War II, we often picture the beaches of Normandy, the liberation of concentration camps, and the fight against Nazi tyranny. But what is not often spoken about is the role the Black American soldiers played in that struggle. Men who wore the uniform of a nation that still denied them basic rights. You know, men who were asked to fight for freedom overseas while being treated as second-class citizens at home. You know, I don't know if some of you, you know, have, you know, veterans in their family that are still alive during that time, but, you know, there was a lot of things that happened. So imagine the complexity of that reality. Imagine, you know, kind of a Black man in the 40s. You couldn't vote in many places. You faced segregation, discrimination, and violence. Yet you answer the call to serve. Then halfway around the world, you encounter people who have been stripped of their dignity, their families, and their humanity in that moment. You become not just a soldier, but a liberator. And that's what's being discussed in this powerful novel that I just read called Black Messiahs. And it's a compelling novel by the author, Stephen A. Holmes. So it's inspired by true events. This story follows Black soldiers and Jewish families whose lives become intertwined against the backdrop of war, racism, faith, and survival. It asks profound questions. What does freedom really mean? What happens when one of the oppressed people become the source of hope for another? And how do men maintain their humanity when surrounded by so much hatred and death? For Black men especially, the story resonates on another level. It reminds us that our history is larger than struggle. It's also a history of leadership, sacrifice, resilience, and heroism. And so too often the stories of Black men are told through the lens of what was done to us. And that what makes this book so, I think, important today and just in the past, because it challenged us to remember what was done by us, but how Black men showed up, served, protected, and changed lives during our darkest periods in human history. So today we sit down with the man who brought us this remarkable story. We'll discuss the inspiration behind the novel, the forgotten history that fueled it, and the lessons it holds for us all today. So just to give a little quick backstory of Stephen A. Holmes, he has a decades-long career as a journalist and editor with iconic media outlets such as Times Magazine, the New York Times, and CNN. And his new novel, which came out last month, received the Get It recommendation from Kirkus Reviews. So I'm going to bring in Steve in just a minute. So Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful Saturday. I just want to get into, I think, I'm sure you're on your kind of book tour since the book just came out, but it was a great book, by the way. I really enjoyed it. Just wanted to kind of preface that. So the title Black Messiahs, which I found very powerful because it's plural. It's not just the Black Messiahs. Mm-hmm. So what does the word Messiah represent in the context of Black soldiers in liberating people during World War II, especially for individuals that during this time period may not have really known all of those stories back then? I think we have a little bit of a delay, folks. Steve, did you hear my question? Steve, you there? Hello, Steve? Hello, Steve? Are you there? Hello, Steve?
Hello, Keith. Can you hear me?
I can. It might be helpful. I know that we won't get to see you. Maybe turn your camera off. That may be helpful. And then we'll just hear your voice. Steve?
Keith, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hold on. It.
Hello, Steve? Hey, Steve. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably better. Can you hear me?
Okay. I can hear you fine now. I turned
Okay.
off my video camera. I'm going to turn it back on again.
No, I would just keep it off. It'll be better. And then people will be able to hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's go back. Did you hear my first question?
I think I did. You were asking me about where the inspiration for the title of Black
Yes.
Messiahs and the
Yes.
importance of that title. The title of the book was inspired actually by a poem written by a Holocaust survivor, a woman by the name of Sonia Weiss, who was in Mauthausen, a notorious concentration camp in Austria near the end of the war. And she was dying, she was near death, and she was lapsing in and out of consciousness. And at one point, she sort of passed out and she awoke and she was being carried to safety and to freedom by a Black soldier. And that inspired her to write a poem called My Black Messiah. And that was the inspiration for the title. I made it plural, messiahs, because I wanted to talk not just about one soldier, but talk about all the Black soldiers who, as you mentioned in your intro, were a source of liberation, even though they were uh, oppressed and repressed at home. And they were a source of liberation mainly for Jews and other peoples who were uh, imprisoned in concentration camps. But I specifically want to focus on the fact that they were a source of liberation for Jewish people who were also oppressed, and talk about sort of the commonality of the fact that you had two people who were both facing uh, racism, uh, genocide, and oppression.
Okay. Yeah, and so what really kind of grabbed me, especially in the beginning, and it took me a minute to realize how you had set up the book, but you had opened the novel with Black soldiers discovering the horrors of Gunskirchen. I think hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Concentration camp. Now, why did you feel you needed to set that scene, from the beginning between the Black American soldiers and the suffering of the Jews?
Well, and you were close in your pronunciation. It's actually Gunskirchen, but
Gunskirchen, okay.
it's close enough. Well, I wanted to place one of my characters, a Black soldier, uh, in the war, and feeling really very depressed, having seen not only battles but seen a lot of killing, and not only killing of other soldiers and of his colleagues and his friends, but of innocent people. And he was feeling very down about all of this. And he's in a tank, and he discovers, along with the other people in his unit, this horrid concentration camp. And he's just uh, amazed and appalled at the suffering that he sees. Um, and he couldn't believe that he could find people who were were forced to live in and to be in such conditions. And then what he thought about it, he related them to the conditions of his own people in America, and he came to the conclusion that while the circumstances were different, the basis that caused the circumstances, which was hate, was similar.
Okay. Okay. And so before we kind of get into the meat of that, what inspired you to write Black Messiahs, and how long has the story, how long did it take for you to kind of craft the story? I figured maybe you you've had the story in your mind, for a while. But I'd love to hear kind of that backstory of what inspired you and what made you really decide that you wanted to put it on paper at this time.
Right. The story of doing something on Black soldiers in World War II had been on my mind for a long time. And I originally wanted to do just sort of a nonfiction history of this one particular tank battalion, the 761st Tank Battalion, which had a really exemplary history. But I found that other people had written histories of them, and I couldn't figure, including one nonfiction history of this particular tank battalion that was written by basketball legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out how could I make my story different, and then I sort of decided, well, let me, rather than writing a nonfiction history, let me write a novel. Let me make it fiction, and I could sort of add things to the history for dramatic and entertaining aspects of it. So I thought of this, and then the inspiration of actually what the framework of the novel would be came about in November of 2020, when then President-elect Joe Biden nominated Anthony Blinken to be his Secretary of State. And I was watching on television, I was watching the news conference announcing the Blinken nomination. And during that news conference, Blinken tells his story of his stepfather, a man by the name of Samuel Pizer, who was a young Jewish boy in Poland during World War II, who was interned in a number of concentration camps and almost died. And at the end of the war, he was rescued by a group of Black soldiers. And I'm watching this, and the idea came, that's what I'll do. I'll tell the story of Black soldiers and Polish Jews, and I'll interweave their stories together and have them basically kind of operate on separate narrative tracks, but meet at the end. And so that's what inspired me to write the story. I figured this is the moment of the rescue is important, but what I'm doing is I'm taking telling the story of how these two groups of people arrived at that one moment.
Okay. And that's a great segue, because that is definitely one of the strongest threads, and it's kind of the theme throughout the whole book, is the connection between anti-Black racism in America and anti-Semitism in Europe. So what conversations were you hoping readers would have after recognizing those parallels, or what threads did you want to or themes you wanted to make sure your readers or interested readers got out of the book?
Well, there's a number of them.
Okay.
First and foremost, I want readers to take away the contributions of Black people to the victory in World War II. First of all, the contributions of Black soldiers on the battlefield, but also, equally as important, the contributions of their families back in the States, who, the Black soldiers, underwent horrible racism in the United States before going over to Europe and fighting against the Nazi Germany. Their families were left behind and were still facing racism in the United States, all the while wondering and hoping that their sons or brothers or lovers would come home. So I want people to take away both the contributions of Black soldiers made and also what their families made. So that's one thing. The second theme that I want people to take away is, you know, more than 8 million Jews were killed by the Nazi regime. And I want people to think about how many of those people might have survived if the United States has used all of its human resources from the outset of the war and not kept Blacks out of the fighting. So that's the second theme I want people to think about. And the third, equally as important, is the commonality of the struggle of Black people and Jewish people. And it's that commonality is something that's sometimes lost in contemporary discussions of racism and anti-Semitism.
And that's pretty powerful, a statement that Blacks were kept out of the war either. And around that time, how many Black soldiers were there at the time?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have the answer to that, but
Okay.
I could tell you that historians have said that 1 million Black people, and that's not just soldiers, but 1 million Black people contributed to the United States war effort in World War II. That's, soldiers on the battlefield, Black workers on the home front, Black women serving in a number of capacities. So it's about 1 million. Now, how many Black soldiers? I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. And so as the book's central characters are primarily around the Johnson family. It's a Black family who have two brothers, Amos and Sammy, who both join the war effort. So and both different people, Sammy being the younger brother of Amos. So by writing about those two characters, what did those two brothers allow you to say kind of about Black masculinity, duty, and freedom?
That's a really interesting question. Let me tell you first how I ended up writing about two brothers.
Okay.
It was, I wanted to tell the story of this Black Tank Battalion that I mentioned. And as I was doing my research, I came across another Black unit that I didn't know very much about, called the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion, which played a very important role, especially during the opening stages of what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. And they had an interesting history, and I wanted to tell their history too. So I tried to figure out, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to tell the story of these two different, separate Black units? And I decided, well, I'll just make my main character have a brother, and one joins one unit, one joins the other unit. So that's how I ended up having two brothers. And to get back to your question, telling the story through two brothers allowed me to talk about a number of things, mainly family dynamics and sibling rivalry. We often, when we talk about Black men, we sometimes forget that Black men are the products of their families, and they have all the sort of themes that run through a lot of our families. Competition between siblings, one sibling being favored more by the parents than the other. And I have to say that in writing this, I leaned heavily on my own background. I have an older brother, who is who I love very much. But when we were younger, we were rivals. We competed against each other in virtually everything.
Okay.
And we competed Not only in sports, we competed for our parents' love and affection. We were just competitors, and we sort of reconciled and stopped competing when we got older and more mature, and realized that at bottom that we really just love each other, and always had each other's back. So I think in talking about in having my main characters be brothers, I can talk about all these kinds of things that go on in a lot of families, a lot of people that we know, and I think it made the book a lot richer, if I may say so, than just sort of having people talk about, okay, what happened on the battlefield.
Okay. And kind of as an aside question, what who was the I guess in your family, what was the one thing that you, or how did you feel when you finally beat your brother at something?
Well, it's funny. I mean, we were we were athletes in school,
Okay.
and when we were younger, and our main sports were swimming and baseball, right?
Okay.
And
Nice.
he was always better than me in swimming. He set the
Okay.
school records in certain swimming, competitive swimming events, and I came after him, and I never broke his records, right?
Oh wow.
But I like to always remind him in baseball, we were on a really good sort of rec league team that won the city championship when we were in our teens. I guess he must have been 17. I think I was a year younger.
Okay.
But I always remind him that, we had a really strong lineup. I remind him, you got to remember, Gil, I batted leadoff. You batted ninth.
Oh wow. Yeah. Back then that's very
Right.
telling.
Yeah, right. Exactly. He hates me to tell that story, but
Does he? Oh man. Okay. That's pretty
but
cool.
we were, yeah.
So back to Amos and Sammy. So Sammy's emotionally exhaustion for witnessing death feels deeply modern and relatable, because he was kind of the one that gets caught up in a lot of the kind of infighting. And so were you kind of, did you write that because you wanted to intentionally explore PTSD and emotional burnout before those terms were commonly used? Is that why you kind of wove that in? Because it was
Yes.
I guess it was very powerful to kind of read, what goes through in war. Because you don't get, I guess when you see a movie, you don't really get that sense as much unless you read it. So I'd love to hear about that.
You don't get that sense as much in World War II for soldiers in World War II. If you read stories or see movies about later wars, such as Vietnam, you kind of, get that kind of sense. And I think that's because, the generation of people who fought in World War II were always told to keep their emotions inside. All right.
Okay.
There weren't very many movies until very recently. I can think of actually only one. With Clint Eastwood did a movie called Flags of Our Fathers a few years back that talked about sort of the emotional toll that was taken on some guys who fought in World War II, some Marines who fought in World War II. But prior to that, you never really talked about people of that generation. Never saw in movies and in books, never had those sort of feelings expressed. And yes, I decided that I would open my book up because I felt that even though those emotions were not expressed in many books or movies, they were there, and I wanted to talk about them right away and get people into my character and have people see my character as being a real human being with feelings and emotions and and depression and fears. So yeah, it was purposeful.
Okay. And what would you, so I guess for people that, of course, were not born at that time, what would you say was the typical Black male existence like back then? And what made them, what was the day that the times that would make them want to join the war? Because, as you know, in America, I mean, they were, as you mentioned, they were, the anti-racism was very prevalent in the community or the nation. So what was the actual thing that would make Black men want to join?
Well, a lot of them felt patriotic, believe it or not. And it is difficult to believe, but many people did feel patriotism. But also there was a sense in the Black community amongst a lot of, especially leaders of in the Black community, that if Black folk joined the war effort and helped win the war, then the United States would feel sort of a sense of gratitude and would want to give Black people more rights, maybe even the right to vote in some places. In a lot of places, this was sort of a false dream, but people had it nonetheless. So that would made a lot of Black men want to join. But one of the things I point out in the book is that this was not just a universal feeling amongst Black people. There were Black people who basically said, this is a white man's war. We have no business fighting in it.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of plays out in the Johnson family, where the mom was pretty adamant, and then and the dad was hesitant as well, but he also had a sense of pride, a bunch of being a Black man. And that's how it's played out in the story?
Yeah, it plays out. The mom was not happy with the oldest son, Amos, volunteering and joining up, and she was very unhappy when the younger boy joined. But it was an interesting dynamic at the time, because the father did not want Sammy to join because Sammy was in college and he wanted him to finish school first. The mother said, listen, he's a grown man. He should do what he feels is right. But even as she says that, she is almost horrified and frightened about the possibility of losing not just one son, but two.
Yes. Okay. Absolutely. And I know we didn't get a sense of, or wanted to take it in direction, but since kind of you brought the fact that you have a brother and there was a sibling rivalry, and that kind of helped shape kind of how you could craft the book. In your family specifically, what was the dynamic between your parents, and as far as how they helped you and your brother proceed, I guess, pursue your dreams and things of that nature?
Well, they were strivers. They were very working. We were a very working class family. My father was a conductor on the New York City subway system for a long time.
Okay.
And then later worked as a dispatcher. My mother was basically like a clerk typist at various places. But from a young age, they were clear that they wanted us to go to college, right, and make something of ourselves. And they wanted us to read. Especially my father. When I got in trouble, when I did something wrong, and I did, I was a normal kid. I got in trouble in school or, on the playground or whatever. My father's punishment was, yes, he took out his belt. I got whipped a couple more than a few times. But the other punishment he would have me do is that I would have to read, 5 books and write book reports for him, not for school, for him. And if he didn't like the book report that I wrote, he would make me write it again. So he always he would have us read and write. And so I think that that led me into never being afraid of writing, and always, in fact, led me into eventually my career in journalism. That I run across people who say, I just can't write. Every time I try to write, I just can't seem to do it, and I never had that problem. And I think it goes back to my father and insisting that I write these book reports and write them again if he didn't like them.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Talk about punishment.
Yeah, well, I'm lucky that he didn't make me hate reading.
Right.
Actually, what happened was, I had to read all these books for him, and turned out that I really liked the books, that I really liked reading.
So what was your what do you feel was your best book report, or the one you were the most proud of?
Oh gosh, it was such a long time ago.
Okay.
All I can tell you is I remember a feeling of a book, the name of which I cannot remember, but it was the sequel to Mutiny on the Bounty.
Okay.
I think it's called Men Against the Sea. But that book had, I finished that book in like a day and a half because it just really just captured me. And I remember I liked it so much that I would read it during the day, and I would read it after the time I was supposed to go to bed, and I'd be under the covers with a flashlight reading this book. I liked it so much.
Okay. Great. That's awesome. Yeah, I don't know if I would be a reader today if I had to write book reports back then. But that's
Right.
that's wild. But so one of the other things which I think was awesome that you tackled, that's something that we would think wasn't as prevalent back then, was the gay relationships as well as the interracial relationships. So let's tackle the interracial relationship first between Sammy and Luis. So which challenged the racial, cultural, and political boundaries during the 40s. Why was that important that you decided to include that in your book?
Well, I wanted to have a connection between my Black characters and my Jewish characters. And I figured I basically made the relationship between Sammy and Louise that connection. And it comes through in a number of ways. Some of them a little kind of tricky ways. Like, for example, I have Louise sometimes coming over to the Johnson house for family dinners and bringing over basically Jewish food to share with them. And one of Amos's favorite things that she brings is sort of a breaded dish called a bialy, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And and New Yorkers know what bialys are. It's a, if you go into any Jewish deli in anywhere in Brooklyn or Manhattan, you can always get a bialy. Well, bialys came from the city of Bialystok in Poland, where my Jewish character came from. So,
Oh, okay.
I did little tricks like that to try and connect the two peoples through the character of Louise and the fact that she had a relationship with Sammy. And one of the things that happens, and I'm not going to kind of give too much detail because it is a little, I don't want to be too much of a spoiler,
Right.
but she takes Sammy to a couple of Jewish ceremonies, to a bar mitzvah and to a Passover Seder. And at these places, Sammy learns a little bit of Hebrew. And it's important that Sammy knows a few Hebrew words. And I won't say why, but it becomes an important thing that for the book itself.
And so, and what I find fascinating is that, I guess, throughout history, our connection is with the Jewish struggle, is not told as much. And why do you feel that is? Because I think, just in essence, just kind of what we've gone through as a people or as a culture are, I guess, somewhat similar, but yet it's almost as if they are torn, kind of torn apart separately. And it's kind of, I guess, sad in a way, but why do you feel that that's done?
Well, I think for a number of things have contributed to sort of keeping us separate, right? I think I don't want to sound naive, right? And I don't want the book to sound naive. To say that there was no racism in the Jewish community would be a lie. There certainly was, amongst some people, maybe even among most people. I've never seen a survey, but it exists, and so I think that helps keep our people apart and our histories apart. To say that there's no anti-Semitism in the Black community is also naive. It also exists among certain Black people, and that helps keep our peoples apart. And I also think among a lot of Black people, when they don't think of Jews as sort of a separate people, they just sort of think of Jews just as, they lump them into the whole category of white people, and that's not unreasonable. But the fact that it happens, you tend to think of Jews just as white folks, and not of a separate people that have had not the same kinds, but certainly similar oppressions that we have had.
Right, and also, but do you also think it's due to a lack of knowledge? Because I think if we think about the Holocaust, of course we think of it as being in Europe, one, and two, we just think of that it really centered around Adolf Hitler, and that's it. But
right.
the atrocities are pretty, I guess, devastating if you really get a chance to really study it.
Yes, I do think that people, Black people, white people, you name it, don't read enough history, right? And don't know enough history. And so when we think of other people, we don't necessarily think of their history and think of how parts of the history kind of mirror, or at least are similar to our own history. And so I think that contributes to this sort of separate or feeling or not sensing the commonality that we might have with Jewish people. And look, there's also, contemporary issues and politics that comes into play. We've Black people have had, differing. I've been on different sides of some important issues with Jewish people, such as affirmative action or how Israel is conducting a war in Gaza. So I want to. I don't. Again, I don't want to sound naive. There are
Mhm.
differences between us that contribute to antagonisms between Blacks
Mhm.
and Jews. But
Right.
I also want to say that there's also commonalities between us that we should think about and remember, even as we talk about the differences.
Okay. And so then, segueing to the next, you had I would say a very kind of intense gay relationship that you brought in the book, which I found quite fascinating and also just interesting, just during the time period where that wasn't often discussed. So why did you feel that you wanted to add that into your book?
Well, I came across it purely by accident. Um, I was doing research on this tank battalion, and I was reading a couple of the books that had been written, the nonfiction histories of it. And in a couple of them, there was a mention, just a mere mention of one guy who was in the unit who everybody described as a quote unquote sissy, right?
Mm,
And I'm reading
mm,
this, I'm thinking, sissy? What? That's a term that probably somebody would use in the 1940s about a person who's gay. And that made me think, what must have it been like to be a gay person in the 1940s, a Black gay person in the army, no less, in the 1940s? That must have been interesting. So I just thought about it and decided, okay, let me just try and play around with that. And it allowed me to discuss a number of things, not only homophobia, but also some certain things such as, uh, and I'll give this away in the book. The gay person, the gay soldier whose name is Lonnie, is befriended by my one of my main characters, Sammy. And uh, what I was trying to do there is talk about courage. And when you think of people in the army displaying courage, you automatically think of them displaying courage on the battlefield.
right.
But what I wanted to do here is get people to think about how much courage would it have taken a straight Black man to befriend a gay Black man in the 1940s.
Mm,
It must have taken a lot because, and I say this in the book, if you start defending him and befriending this gay person, everybody's going to think you're gay too.
right.
And yet, and yet, Sammy goes ahead and does it and befriends him.
Yeah, I found that. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned courage because I that didn't immediately come to mind, but I thought it was very endearing that he actually felt the need to befriend him and I guess also humanize him as well. That he wasn't wasn't some freak or what have you, and that he had courage. He had the abilities of a soldier despite
Mhm.
his relationship choice.
Right, right. And not only a soldier, but I tried to make him. How did I put it? I wanted to. I had to make him. This is the gay character. I
Mhm.
had to make him um, somewhat effeminate, right? Because otherwise, why would people think that he was gay if he, wasn't somewhat effeminate? But he couldn't be too effeminate because everybody if it was proven that he was gay, he'd be kicked out of the army during the time, who didn't allow
Mm.
gay soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and I also tried to give him other qualities um, that, um, and this was one of the things that Sammy used to would ponder in the book. I gave my gay character other qualities that Sammy didn't think gay people had. Like, for example, I made him really good at basketball, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I made him I made him really good at driving a Sherman tank, which is not an easy thing to do, right? I had fun with that character because and and I hopefully I made him interesting.
Yes. Yes. Actually, absolutely. And so, because the book was so, I guess, detailed, what kind of research did you have to do to ensure that you authentically captured the experience of the Black soldiers, the survivors, and then the interracial relation dynamics during World War II? Did you have to do a lot of travel or look at archives to make sure your story was authentic?
I did both. I went to the National Archives and I looked up the records of these Black units, including after action reports and other things that gave descriptions of battles and of training and of lots of things like that. And I read a lot. I went to the sites of a lot of museums. There's a really good World War II museum in New Orleans. I visited that. I looked at a lot of videos put out I read training manuals. And then I read a lot about the Holocaust, specifically about concentration camps that I decided to include in the book. And then my wife and I spent several weeks traveling around Europe to places that are in the book. We went in places in France and in Belgium and in Poland, sites of former concentration camps. A number of them have been turned into sort of museum sites. In fact, all of them are, in some way, are kind of memorialized now. So it's so yeah, I did quite a bit of research.
And what was that energy like, just being at the concentration camps? Did you get the feeling that what had taken place there?
Yeah, yeah. In some, not all. Auschwitz is probably the most well-known concentration camp, and it is heavily visited. And you go there, and you feel like you're at a tourist site. There's so many people and so many groups. So I didn't get a sense or a feeling of what had taken place there. But a couple of others, Treblinka is was probably the most haunting place um, I've I visited during my travels. It's in Treblinka was a killing factory, right? It was only open and operating for less than a year, right? And in that period of time, it killed almost 1 million people, almost all of them Jews,
Wow.
right? Now, the Nazis, when they shut it down, they completely razed it and obliterated it. And they planted basically a forest, a bunch of pine trees. And you go there now, and there's these very mature pine trees. And they've recreated some of the aspects of the concentration camp. For example, they restored what was a railroad station, in which the Nazis basically had set up. So when the trains and the cattle cars full of Jews pulled in. When people got out of the cattle cars, they looked around and they looked like they were at a normal train station. And they did that to calm them. So before they basically shuttle them into the gas chambers. But you go there today, and I went there on this sort of overcast, dreary day, and there's these pine trees, and the wind is sort of blowing through these pine trees, and in the rustling of these pine needles, you can almost hear the voices of the million people who were slaughtered there. It's a harrowing and haunting experience. So
wow.
So yeah, you really did feel what happened there.
Wow. That is pretty scary. That's pretty scary just to think about.
It's really scary. Yeah. It's really it's
So what do you believe historical fiction can accomplish that traditional history books sometimes can't, especially kind of when telling stories about Black people and overlooked communities?
Well, I think historical fiction can be entertaining, right? And you know, regular histories can be informative, but they also can be very dry, right? And somewhat boring, if I might say so. And so
Okay.
you have to be kind of a history buff to really get something sometimes out of nonfiction histories. I am, so it doesn't, I am kind of a history buff, but not everybody is, and that's okay. But if you do historical fiction, you can add in things that make it readable and entertaining, like sibling rivalry, or like descriptions of battles and what people are thinking during a battle. That makes it, the reader want to sort of get invested in the characters and want to find out what happens to the characters, because fiction is all about characters, right? And writing characters in a way that people like them or hate them, but basically are invested in and want to find out what happens to them. And so that becomes, again, makes it more readable. And so, but while you're reading it and you're entertained by it, you're learning history. Because in my book, yeah, there's a lot of things that are sort of made up, but there's what I call the spine of truth that runs throughout the book. Things that actually happened, or places that actually existed, or people that were real. And so there's the spine of truth, but I can make up a whole bunch of stuff all around it to make it more readable.
Right. Yeah, and that's I truly believe that, because there were some things about the book that I didn't know, or I have had to kind of look up and definitely gave a context of what it was like back then. And I guess that's really the reason why you wrote it, because you really get a true sense of not only what the patriotism amongst Black families, what Black families had to go through, even women's place in the war, and what they Black women specifically, what their place was in society, and trying to I guess level up, so to speak. And so you did a great job in that aspect, as far as I'm concerned. So another question I had, in this, I guess in probably a month since the book has been out, what have the readers said about the book, and have they said anything that has kind of surprised you in their, I would say critique, but as their assessment of your book?
Gee, if they said anything that surprised me. I would say I had not been surprised by reaction. There's one reaction that's come out over and over, which I don't want to go into again into great detail. Um, but it's about the fate of one of the main characters,
Okay.
who everybody likes a lot, and I'll just leave it at that. And I've gotten a
Mm-hmm.
lot of feedback on that.
Okay. Well, yeah. After we get off, I'd love to hear what that is because we don't want to blow it, but I'd love to
Okay.
hear, what
Okay.
what people have said. So, what do you hope readers, especially Black men, take away from Black Messiahs in today's cultural climate?
Well, I hope that they take away. Well, there's a couple of things that I think really stand out amongst my Black male characters. One I already touched on it, and that's courage. Um, and let me touch on that a little bit more. I mentioned Sammy's courage in befriending his gay colleague. Um, I want to talk about Amos's courage in sort of confronting his sort of inner demons, right? And again, I don't want to go into great detail, but he has something that's pointed out to him about himself. It's sort of like, always hear somebody say, let me tell you about yourself.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And most times when we hear people say that, we really don't pay that much attention to what they got to say. Sometimes we do, but usually we kind of blow it off. But in Amos's case, his wife tells him something very important about himself, very critical about himself. And he thinks about it and thinks about it, and he makes changes. And so one of the things I would like Black men to sort of come away with in today's environment, is to be introspective, to think about what it is you do and why you do it, and is it helpful or harmful? And if you can really face it, and if it's harmful, try and make changes. And how you go about making changes is up to you. You could just do it on your own. You could do it through therapy. I don't care. But to look at yourself closely, at your good points and your bad points, is really important thing to do. So and it takes courage. Um, so I think that's sort of one of the main things I like um, Black men to take away from this book and from
Okay.
my description of my characters.
Awesome. And finally, was there, if you had to be a character in your book, who would have that character have been and why?
That's easy, Sammy,
Okay.
because Sammy is sort of patterned after me. It really is.
Oh, okay.
You know, um, I mentioned that I had a brother, an older brother,
Yep.
and when we were sort of coming out of high school, he sort of followed the straight and narrow. He followed the path that my parents sort of laid out for him. He went straight from undergrad to law school to setting up his own law practice, right? Me, on the other hand, I was sort of the rebel. I dropped out of college after my freshman year, bummed around for 3 years, right, doing a whole bunch of things which I don't encourage any of your readers to do, and any of your listeners to do. Um, and I was just kind of a rebel, and finally got pulled it together and went back to school and decided that I'd become a journalist and made a career out of it. Um, so Sammy was I was Sammy in many ways. Uh, and you know, it just and it was easy to. He was easy to write. He was my easiest character to write. The other ones were difficult, but there's an awful lot of Sammy in me and me in Sammy.
That's interesting. Okay, I'm glad you shared that. I mean, that story, and there's kind of a follow up to that. So, if Amos was kind of, I guess, centered around your brother, did he like that character?
You know, I haven't talked to him about it. I'm going out to California
Okay.
Tomorrow, in fact, with hopping on a plane to do a couple of events. I think I mentioned in LA, and
Okay.
my brother lives in the LA area, and we're going to stay with him, and I'm going to talk to him about the book and see how much of that character he identifies with. He might not identify with them at all.
Okay.
But
Interesting.
But
Interesting.
but I got to tell you a story. When I was writing the book, I called him up at one point and said, "Gil, listen, I'm writing this book, and I got these two characters, and they're brothers. You know, and the older one is kind of straight and follows, you know, a straight and narrow path, and the younger one's kind of a rebel."
Stephen?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear
Oh
you now,
no.
I think.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, go back. I didn't hear any of your story.
Oh, you want me to tell?
Yeah, just just the end.
Oh, okay. So I I told my brother about these two characters, you know, and he starts laughing, and he says, "Gee, I wonder where you got that from."
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure it wasn't hard for him to know who he was in the story. Well, Stephen, I have to say
Not at
this is
all.
yeah, this is great. Much success to your book, Black Messiahs. And if you love stories, but definitely historical fiction, this is a great book to pick up and read. I'm gonna say it's a quick read. But it's a very interesting read that I think everyone should pick up, this summer. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Good questions. I enjoyed it.
All right, great. This is Keith Dent from the Black Men Speak podcast. I really appreciated you being on today, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. And I look forward to providing more insights and stories for you, highlighting the ordinary stories of Black men doing extraordinary things. Everybody have a great day. Thanks.